Good afternoon, everyone. And after that fascinating and really interesting session on women's rights, we have another very exciting session, and that looks at India Unbound in 4 critical areas: democracy, demography, digitization, and deglobalization. Now, each of these 4 Ds, as these are called, there is a revolution of sorts that is happening across the country. And to discuss the challenges ahead, as well as the progress and maybe regress, we have 2 eminent speakers. Amitabh Kant, India's G20 Sherpa, former CEO of Niti Aayog, and a secretary to government. And PTR Thiagarajan, Tamil Nadu's erudite finance and human resources minister. PTR, I'm going to start with you on this. And let's look at the first D, and that is democracy. And India prides itself as the world's largest democracy, and Arun talked about it in his opening speech this morning, that we have overtaken China as the most populous country in the world as well. And yet, even as we speak about it, there is a raging debate in Parliament, with Rahul Gandhi being censured by the ruling BJP for his critical remarks about Indian democracy when he went to the UK recently. Just yesterday, he said that whether I'm allowed to speak or shut up is a test of India's democracy. So, Finance Minister, how do you look upon India's democracy? Is it a democracy on the ascent, as the ruling BJP and many others would like to classify it? Or is it on the descent, as Rahul Gandhi and others describe it, some even calling it an electoral autocracy?
Yeah, for me, I think democracy is at the heart of everything, right? I mean, if we go back, and I don't want to sound partisan, so I'm going to talk more philosophically. I'm happy to become partisan if you ask me the right question, but right now I'll say, I think it is now beyond doubt that democracies where you have strong, independent institutions, where there is a vibrant opposition, where there is accountability, this kind of a democracy, high rates of growth, and good social progress go together. I think that's beyond doubt. There used to be a question, does economic activity drive institutional kind of superiority or the other way around? I think right now we know it's not a chicken and egg problem. The more you have robust, independent institutions, the more you have a vibrant opposition, the more there's accountability, the more likely that you are to get not just a better society, but also a better economy, faster rates of growth. From that perspective, I would have to say that it's not a subjective opinion on almost any scale anywhere in the world that our democracy has not been progressing in the last few years, probably regressing. Institutions are becoming less independent, more kind of aligned with the central axis of power. So I don't want to get into instances, but broadly, I would say that the quality of our democracy leaves a lot to be desired and is going in the wrong direction.
But let's also get you on what you so-called partisan, but let's see your views on Rahul Gandhi and what he said, and should he be censured by the BJP on this?
Look, I don't think any party gets the right to censure, right? Either the speaker censures, and usually that's for things that are said in the House. What is said outside the House should be kept outside the House. If you exceed the parliamentary code inside the House, the Speaker has the right to make a censure. You cannot take comments made by somebody outside the House, bring that into the House and start making an issue of it unless you list it as a debate and get everybody to speak. Just because you have a majority, you cannot decide what is an acceptable subject and not an acceptable subject to be debated in the People's House. Right? There has to be some norm.
And what is your personal views about Rahul Gandhi and what he said? Do you think they were defamatory of the country?
I will restrict myself. Democracy. If it is a democracy, there should be equal opportunity in the House, and the censure or lack of censure should be for things that are said in the House. Why should I opine on anybody else's private statement outside the House? Every citizen is entitled to that. That's not subject for political debate, right? At least not in the House, outside maybe.
But you didn't say, do you agree with him or not?
It is not my job to have an opinion of what he says. I'm telling you the quality of our democracy is deteriorating, and that's unilateral in most assessments. This particular instance, I don't see as my job to comment. It's not my day job as a minister, right?
And let's talk about, this is a much talked about subject, the demographic dividend. Now, there is a huge eligible working population, and India is probably going to have the largest because China is declining. And 59% of our population is between the ages 20 to 60, which is the working population. Now, have we exploited PTR, in your opinion, the advantage that is there, or will this, because we have not done the kind of things that we've done, really become a curse rather than a dividend?
Yeah, I think there's a window of opportunity where we will have this kind of average age be in our favor. Places like Tamil Nadu, we're already past that. We're past the peak. Our birth rate is now only about 1.6 TFR. So we're already aging population. Without migrant labor, we cannot function, and that's why we're very conducive and open to it. But as a country, and particularly, and there's a great disparity, right? If you take like the northern states, the TFR is still 3+, in some cases 3.5+. So there, unless you can create job opportunities fast enough, you're going to have a problem. That's very clear. If you look across the span of history, having a lot of unemployed youth is a precursor for social unrest. So I think, at least as far as my state is concerned, we still have a lot more to do, but we are not in a desperate situation where we have a lot of unemployed youth. The youth unemployment rates are probably, in the 10, 12%. But if the statistics that I read are accurate around the country, as high as 25, 30, higher than that, surely that becomes a problem. If not now, sooner rather than later, that becomes a problem. So I think job creation, for example, in our state, we are focusing a lot on skilling beyond gross education, which is the highest in the country. Enrollment in higher education is double the national average, right? It's 52%. Yet we have a lot of people who are not capable of getting employed immediately upon graduation or in the right field and so forth. So we focused a lot since we came to power 2 years ago on upskilling and finding partnerships where we can pre-certify people in required skills, not just in India, but in places like Australia or Germany, so that we can have direct employment opportunities in places where there's a shortage of labor, and we can move our people into that high end of the labor spectrum, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 starting wages kind of jobs.
Your chief minister is known as the dashboard chief minister. He has a dashboard where he tracks every single development that's happening across it. How can a state like Tamil Nadu leverage that? What is the advantages and what are the disadvantages? Have you seen any lacuna that you find that needs correction?
Let me answer this more as a former banker than anything else. While I agree with the notions and the ideas that my friend has stated here, in the parliament, I think a few days ago, there was a reply that the cash in circulation today is twice what it was at the time of demonetization, twice in actual value. So something is not quite universal. I agree. I was a banker. I've seen what electronic transformation can do. It is as good or better than in any other country. The RBI has a lot of credit for this. This was true even 10 years ago. The payment model in India was, or 20 years ago, better than most countries. Where we have a problem is there is still a divide, and that is in a state like Tamil Nadu, which is the most urbanized state in the country. 50% of all people live in cities, and yet we don't have as good access. We are just going to announce in this budget a special program to provide last mile access to the villages and to everybody. So first of all, access is not universal. Second, a lot of people don't have the basic kind of capacity. So we've moved a lot of our things online. You see, when you have a lot of people-to-people interactions, there's room for rent-seeking, malfeasance, all kinds of complexity. So we moved a lot of services online, including getting like your life certificate for your pension, including getting your other government documents and so forth. And we found some people just don't have the capacity to reach through the online portal. Particularly the older, poorer people don't have access yet. So we have now found mechanisms to take the service to their house. So, we have to be a bit thoughtful. There is still a digital divide, maybe not nearly as bad as it used to be. But in our government, we are trying our best to first get everybody online, second, move as many services as possible online, and remove the need for physical buildings, for personal interaction, for any kind of downside that arises from it. But I think somewhere in the total payment model, as good as we are, we still need to get a lot better because the volume of cash, for example, let's give the contrast. When I was a banker globally in Kenya, when Vodafone announced the M-Pesa, within something like 5 years, 65% of the economy was transacting on one platform. Right? So I think that level of reach we have still not got. So there's room for us to improve, particularly through inclusion and better access and training in remote areas. Urbanization will fix a lot of problems, but you'll always have rural areas. So you still got to have some program for that.
How do you view this trend of deglobalization? Tamil Nadu has benefited. I mean, Apple is in many ways moving out of China, if you want to call it regionalization, and coming and setting up its largest factories in your state.
I'm not sure what I can say in 5 seconds.
No, we'll give you a minute.
Well, I think there are 4 or 5 things here. First, we should remember that globalization is secular, but at a kind of historic level, it's also cyclical. There used to be the age of empire, there used to be the age of Roman Empire, colonialism. So the extent of globalization actually goes up and down. It's not, always going up. In 20 years, 30 years, going one way, then it goes the other way, then comes the other. Second, the overall volume of globalization doesn't kind of discriminate between bilateral trade or the shift away from China towards India that our colleague is talking about. So I think there are a lot of opportunities. Third, the value of globalization is inarguable. Mathematically, you will show that the more there is barrier-free trade and access, you will get greater growth, no question. The downside of globalization is unless governments are particularly focused on it, such rapid increase in growth will also lead to increases in inequality and stratification of society, and you're likely to find a lot of people get disgruntled, as you're seeing in the Western economies, because people at the lower level of skill have completely lost out on the benefits of globalization, and big investment bankers and corporates did really well. So you have to do it carefully. But I completely agree in an overall perspective that this is a wonderful opportunity. I can't think of a better time for India as a country, given the macro trends around liquidity still being quite high, around the de-risk China kind of movement, around the geopolitical instability everywhere else. This ought to be India's moment. What worries me, and this includes me as Tamil Nadu, I'm not just talking about the union government, what worries me is, are we doing enough to actually capture this opportunity, and are we dedicating the right level of attention and resources, because this window won't stay open forever.
And execution as
Right.
well.
And so, it is a golden moment, probably better than any other time. Are we doing enough? I'm not that comfortable. I think there's a lot more we should do, and we need to grasp the moment while it's there.
Well, finally, there's a conclave moment that we talk about, and we have just 30 seconds for that, which is, I'm looping right back to democracy, because democracy is central. Without it, this nation will not drive itself at all. PTR, what is it that you like most about Indian democracy, and what is it that you don't like about Indian democracy?
I like its diversity. I like that it has so much scale. I'll just give you one example. I was at the Indian Express or some conclave, and they said, you're a leading voice of dissent in India. And I said, it's awkward that the finance minister of a large industrialized state, who ought to be the system, is seen as a dissenter. It says something is structurally wrong. So I like that it's got that much diversity. And that is great, and for the scale of our country, that's wonderful. I would like to see a lot more independent, strong institutions including people like me, accountable, holding all those in power accountable to a greater degree than we have now.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've run out of time. Let's give them a very warm round of applause for this. Thank you so much. Thank you, Amitabh. Thank you, PTR.